Hi, everybody. My name is Marissa Adams, and I'm the marketing manager here at Trace. Thank you all so much for working with us on our last-minute rescheduling, and we really appreciate the kind words of support following the storm. I am happy to report that everyone made it through safely on our end. As always, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end during the Q&A session. And we will be sending out the slides and recording to everyone who registered next week. So if anyone was unable to make it today, they will get the recording. To get us started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce TraceSecurity and give you some background into our expertise in information security. With over 20 years in business, TraceSecurity is a leading provider of cybersecurity and compliance solutions. Our company was founded in 2004 as one of the first technology companies to incubate in the Louisiana Technology Park. Our company's mission at its founding was simple: to help banks and credit unions protect their customer and member information and comply with GLBA, FFIEC, and NCUA requirements. Since then, TraceSecurity has served over 3,000 organizations across the U.S. We have established many partnerships, most notably our strategic alliance with America's Credit Unions, which positions us as their exclusive provider of cybersecurity and compliance services. TraceSecurity's comprehensive portfolio of solutions allow organizations to manage their information security program through IT risk assessments and audits, social engineering, penetration testing, security training, and more. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Taylor Olinde, one of our information security analysts, who's going to talk to you all about on-site social engineering today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Olinde, and I've been with TraceSecurity for over 3 years now. I performed about 25 on-site social engineering engagements with over a 60% success rate based on getting into at least one location per engagement. I enjoy working with our other analysts to come up with a variety of pretexts, props, and report findings. I'm excited to tell you all about my experiences today. To get us started, let's go over some quick definitions. Social engineering is the psychological manipulation of employees for the purpose of gathering information and/or gaining access to organizational assets. Taking advantage of human error is the goal here. Social engineering has many forms, from phishing emails to vishing calls, or from smishing text messages to on-site attempts. Social engineering is generally split up into two categories: remote and on-site. Remote social engineering is when an attacker tries to manipulate their victims remotely. Phishing is the most common type of remote social engineering. It is often used as a catch-all term, but it specifically refers to attacks over email. Attackers typically send malicious links in hopes that employees will click them and install malware or input sensitive information. Voice phishing, called vishing, is when the attacker calls you over the phone. The goal here is usually to convince employees to follow instructions, such as running commands on their computer. SMS phishing, called smishing, is when the attacker sends you a text message. Like phishing, smishing typically includes suspicious links. Attackers may even simply ask employees to send critical information over text. On-site social engineering is when an attacker tries to manipulate their victims in person. This includes a wide variety of things, such as impersonating a vendor or employee, sneaking in through unlocked doors, dumpster diving, USB drops, and more. This is the type of social engineering we'll be focusing on today. Whether remote or on-site, any social engineering attack starts with a pretext. Pretexting is making up a fake identity scenario to trick their victim and lull them into a false sense of security. Picking a good pretext is especially important for on-site social engineering, where you have to physically present yourself and your pretext to unsuspecting employees. A thorough attacker will prepare multiple pretexts to be ready for any scenario. When testing multiple locations, I'll bring multiple disguises in case one of them catches on to my lies. That way, I can make a quick change on the way to the next location and have a fresh pretext. Pretext examples include posing as a vendor, an employee, a customer, or any other persona that will help an attacker circumvent your defenses. Next, I'm going to talk about some common things we're able to exploit during our on-site social engineering engagements. For each one, I'll explain the finding, talk about some of my personal experiences, and discuss recommendations and mitigation steps. First up, we're going to talk about a low or informational severity finding, information disclosure. Information disclosure occurs when employees divulge non-public information to individuals outside of the organization's staff. This typically occurs as a result of making small talk while attempting to authorize an unexpected visit. It can also occur when suspicions arise and the pretext is taken into question. I've had employees give away key information such as confirmed vendors, names and titles of authorizing employees, and availability of management. While posing as a local pest control company, I've had an employee tell me the name of the actual pest control company they use. If my point of contact hadn't told me not to use their actual vendor in advance, I absolutely would have changed my pretext for the engagement for the next locations. It's important to be aware of what you say to strangers, whether it's in person, over the phone, or otherwise. Some things may feel totally innocent to share, like the names and titles of employees, when certain people will or won't be in office, or the name of a vendor. While it's normally difficult to leverage this information on the fly, it could be used for future social engineering attempts or by teams of individuals to carry out more advanced attacks. Of course, some information needs to be available online, like leadership names and titles, but it is important to limit unnecessary information sharing where possible. It's probably not necessary to publicly share employees' direct email addresses and phone numbers. While disclosing non-public information isn't a fail in terms of the engagement, it could be used by an attacker to give them a better chance of success. Giving away as little information as is necessary is the key to prevent accidentally disclosing important details to potential bad actors. Employees should be aware of what information they're willingly giving away while having discussions with non-employees. Next up is a medium severity finding, tailgating. Tailgating, or piggybacking, is the act of following an employee through a restricted entryway. This can be accomplished by following directly behind employees or catching doors before they close after employees exit through them. For our on-sites, tailgating isn't usually the first option. I typically go through the normal routine of approaching the front desk, giving my cover story, and trying to gain access this way. Reason being, it's much more important to test for higher severity vulnerabilities first. More on this in just a minute. When I do attempt tailgating, it is usually a balancing act of hanging out near non-public entrances while trying not to seem suspicious. What I'll do is pretend to be on the phone with a point of contact or an internal employee based on my pretext. Honestly though, I just call my mom and chat while I wait. Although this tactic requires luck and good timing, it is extremely effective when done successfully. Vigilance is key when it comes to preventing tailgating. Employees should make sure that restricted doors close behind them and only allow individuals that they are 100% certain are authorized to follow behind them. Although ideally, every employee should allow the door behind them to close, forcing the next person to have to scan in to gain entry. My favorite example of this being done right was very recently, actually. While on site with another analyst, I got to watch an employee physically pull the door close while the other analyst tried to catch up and get through the door behind them. While it was probably extremely awkward for both of them, it was hilarious for me and a perfect example of how to address tailgating. Lastly is a high severity finding, unauthorized and/or unescorted access. Unauthorized access is when a visitor gets into non-public areas without signing in or being verified. Unescorted access is when a visitor, authorized or not, is left alone in non-public areas while unauthorized access could be obtained through tailgating. It's even worse when an employee breaks escort procedures and knowingly leaves you alone. The negligence of unescorted access is what really raises this to a high severity finding. I've encountered a few employees over the years that were either too oblivious or too indifferent to validate my unexpected visit. Taking this a step further, there have been a few instances where said employees showed me to the area where I needed to perform work and left me be. During their absence, I've been able to document the vulnerability with pictures of myself in critical non-public areas, but if I was a bad actor, I've been able to do much worse, like leave behind a device to connect to later. My first ever social engineering is a perfect example of this. When myself and the training analyst showed up to one of the locations, we walked in and I had on a reflective vest with the company logo of our pretext. I explained our cover story to the front desk, they got someone from management, and that was it. Without checking our IDs and without authorizing the visit, the manager led us to the server room. Any form of validation would have proven our visit to be unscheduled, unauthorized, and fraudulent. Employees should always validate visits from third parties, expected or unexpected. This should include direct approval from appropriate personnel, as well as ID verification and sign-in procedures. It's always important to escort visitors through non-public areas. Even if employees aren't sure what work is being performed, their presence could dissuade bad actors from carrying out malicious actions. The purpose of sign-in procedures is to maintain a log of visitors to facilities. This information could come in handy if the organization decides to do an internal investigation on a potential event, or if information needs to be provided to the authorities. Even if an attacker used falsified information, it's better than nothing. If an attacker was successful in gaining access, they may continue social engineering in an attempt to break escort procedures. While I haven't gotten to try this one out personally, I've had another analyst recommend to me to simply ask the escorting employee for a PIN. Super simple request, right? Wrong. While the escort is away, I'll have a small window of opportunity to take a picture and snoop around. If I wanted to cause unobserved damage to equipment, I could during this time. My go-to when being escorted or trying to access non-public areas without an escort is to ask to use the restroom. If you wait in there long enough, there's a good chance the escorting employee gets bored or feels awkward enough to leave you alone. If you see someone you don't recognize wandering around alone in non-public areas of your office, you should approach them to see what they're doing. If your organization uses visitor badges, it's easy to see who has properly signed in and been verified versus someone who snuck in. However, even if they have a visitor badge, they should still be escorted. I wouldn't put it past an attacker to print fake visitor badges. Now, I want to take a minute to discuss some more advanced tactics used in on-site social engineering. Something that comes up when we talk about on-site social engineering is red teaming. Red teaming is considered an all-out attack against an organization, an attacker using everything at their disposal to gain unauthorized access. This could include remote social engineering, tailgating, USB drops, penetration testing attempts, lockpicking, and more. Attackers will spend weeks or even months trying to breach a single organization. These types of attacks can be mimicked in multi-day engagements like red team testing. The reality is that attackers have all the time in the world. Unlike adhering to a specific project schedule, real bad actors can take as much time as they like to perform social engineering attempts, as long as they don't get caught, of course. This could end up being multiple days back to back, or a few days here and there over the course of weeks or even months. It is important for employees to be vigilant at all times and always follow proper procedures for dealing with unauthorized visitors. RFID badges are the key cards or fobs you use to enter badge doors. This could be non-public areas of your office or even just a gate to your apartment complex. Within your office, there might even be secondary badge doors that only certain employees have access to, like your server room. Badge skimming involves wirelessly reading the data of an RFID badge owned by an employee of the target organization. This allows the attacker to create a legitimate RFID badge for themselves, allowing access to the facility without needing to perform additional social engineering to gain access. The best preventative measure for this is to use wallets or cases that block RFID signals, therefore heavily reducing the possibility of skimming. Keeping track of RFID badges by keeping them on your person provides a good additional layer of security. Speaking of layered security, badge skimming really shows how important it is to follow the concepts of least privilege and separation of duties. If a regular employee has their badge skimmed, the attacker might be able to access some of your non-public office space, but shouldn't be able to access the more critical areas like a data center or a file storage area. Even though I haven't actually seen the movie, I'm going to make a quick reference to Ocean's 11. Multiple attackers can work out a lot like in the movie, with each attacker being given a specific role or job to assist in the overall social engineering attempt. Multiple attackers means a larger surface area of attack, more attempts if someone's cover is blown, and working together to create organized chaos in the attacker's favor. If you recall the tailgating story, you may remember I mentioned being on site with another analyst. For that engagement, the other analyst posed as an employee of the organization, whose goal was to gain access to the facility and then give me access as a third-party vendor. That way, if anyone saw us together, they would hopefully assume that the other analyst was escorting me throughout the facility and that we were both authorized to be there. Mitigation for this is the same as with any other social engineering. Employees should be on the lookout for suspicious persons and follow proper procedures. Remote social engineering can be used in tandem with on-site social engineering to compromise a target. For example, I might send a spoofed email from someone in management to the facility in an attempt to validate my on-site social attempt. If they don't take the time to validate the email, it becomes significantly easier for my pretext to work. On-site social engineering also helps tee up other hacking attempts like penetration testing. If an attacker is able to install a device on the network, they may be able to access the network remotely and use this foothold to perform penetration testing. With human error being the biggest cause of data breaches, mitigation comes in the form of preparing your employees to recognize these types of attacks in real time. Training is the most important mitigation step for social engineering. Employees need to be aware of social engineering and the different forms it takes to properly prepare for and respond to social engineering attempts. Annual security awareness training is recommended for all employees of the organization, although more frequent training can be beneficial. Other than security awareness training, remote social engineering testing is a great option to test employees' ability to pick up on and respond to phishing, vishing, and smishing attempts. Testing campaigns can be put together and sent out to your employees to supplement security awareness training. On-site social engineering training is also a great option. This can test your employees' ability to follow proper procedures when physically facing a social engineering threat. Policies should be in place to reinforce training material and define strict guidelines for responding to authorized and unauthorized visits, emails, phone calls, etc. Policies should include steps for ID verification, proper authorization, sign-in processes, and employee escort. Every organization is unique, but should be covering these topics in some capacity in training and in policies. An important thing to note for ID verification is the difference between government-issued IDs and internal IDs like badges. It is our recommendation to always request a government-issued ID, such as a driver's license from visitors. These IDs are more common, consistent, and harder to make look legitimate. Internal company badges should be seen as a nice bonus to cross-reference with the government ID. Similarly, I've seen a lot of variety when it comes to information being recorded on sign-in sheets. There have been instances where they wrote down my name, company, and reason for visit, and other instances where they wrote down my name, company, time in and out, driver's license number, had me sign the sheet, maiden name, where I went to high school. Just kidding. In all seriousness, it doesn't hurt to have more information for the same reasons as mentioned above. After ID verification, authorization, and sign-in occurs, it is recommended to give the visitor a visitor badge. These badges are like the high visibility reflective vests of non-public areas. If employees see a visitor with one of these, they'll be able to know immediately that they've gone through the proper sign-in procedures. It's never unreasonable to verify an unescorted visitor, and you should always err on the side of caution. TraceSecurity offers fully custom on-site social engineering engagements for our clients. I'm going to talk a little about the specifics of what we do. When we start to set up your on-site social engineering engagement, you get to discuss and choose the ISA's pretext. We discuss your objectives and decide on a good cover story to test your employees and procedures. The primary objective is typically to gain non-public access to facilities. However, your objectives could also be acquiring sensitive information, plugging in devices like USBs, and secure disposal of sensitive information. We've come up with a variety of cover stories, including insurance adjusters, alarm companies, pest control, contractors, customer, and more. Feel free to get creative and discuss your IDs on the call with our analysts. After discussing your pretext, the ISA will put together their disguise for the upcoming engagement. Custom badges are typically made to mimic third-party identification. Clothing is also chosen to resemble that of a real third-party employee, and props are used to seem more legitimate. I've personally used bug spray pumps, service order forms, and toolkits while on-site. We can also add on things like dumpster diving or USB drops to our on-site social engineering engagements. Real attackers will check dumpsters for improperly disposed of information like financial documents. They might also leave random USBs in hallways or parking lots to try to get a curious employee to plug in to their workstation. A simple payroll label can trick an employee into opening a file with ransomware. Here's an example of a disguise I used on a recent on-site engagement, impersonating the organization's local alarm company. I went to the company's website and social media pages to research what they typically wear. I got a shirt that looked a lot like what they wear and clipped my badge over where the logo would have been. We can get custom shirts embroidered, but this was an easy way to avoid having to do that. I also chose the pants and boots specifically because they closely resembled the company's uniform. Before coming on-site, I do research on the location or locations that I will be testing to familiarize myself in advance. I use Google Maps to research each location for entry points, both public and non-public, as well as looking for somewhere to park that's out of the way. Along with this, I also plan my route according to your preferences and mine. I typically prefer to do more vulnerable locations last, as I can be more brazen with my tactics with less fear of getting caught and compromising the rest of the engagement. Larger facilities are typically more vulnerable as they will have more employees and more access points. This means more opportunities to try to get into different areas and less suspicion once I'm in. I mean, think about it. If you work in a building with 50 or even 100 employees, would you think encountering a random service technician worker that you've never seen before was suspicious? Timing is also important when planning the route between locations. It's important to try and stay ahead of any internal communication that may lead to my cover getting blown before the engagement is complete. Sometimes employees will address surprise visits extremely well by communicating the event quickly and effectively to other organizational facilities and management teams. I once had a branch manager listen to my entire cover story with a little grin on her face just to tell me no and immediately ask me to leave. Employees are your biggest line of defense against social engineering attacks. In recent years, these attacks have been rapidly increasing in both frequency and complexity. It's important to stay on top of current trends and prepare for these situations with proper training and policies. I hope you learned more about on-site social engineering and feel better prepared to recognize these attacks in real time.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and start getting into questions, and y'all feel free to ask more as we go. We'll answer as many as we can. Okay, so someone asked how USB drops work.
So for our USB drops, we program the USBs in advance so that they send a response back whenever the files on the device are accessed. On the scoping call with the client, we confirm how many USBs are going to be dropped based on the service agreement, and then we discuss what locations and in what quantities they're going to be dropped. The analyst usually makes the judgment call while they're on site, where specifically they want to drop the USBs, unless the point of contact has a specific preference on where they want them dropped.
Okay. All right, let's see. Do you recommend pairing remote and on-site social engineering testing, like sending fake emails in advance to verify your fake on-site visit?
Sending phishing emails for on-site social engineering is kind of a personal preference. I personally prefer not to do this because instead of helping you get in, it might have the opposite effect. And if employees can appropriately address the fake email, then they'll know before you even show up for the onsite that you're not scheduled and authorized to be there. I have had it work in the past where as soon as I showed up, they did let me in. But for the other 3 locations for that engagement, they turned me away without listening to my pretext at all. So it personally depends on preference. My preference is not to include phishing as a part of on-site social engineering.
Okay. And do you notice any difference in success in compromising an organization if they have one location versus if they have multiple locations?
Usually organizations that test more locations will see more failures during their engagements, but that's usually because it gives the analyst more opportunities for success. It's still possible to see failures with one location, but obviously with 4, you have 4 chances to get in as opposed to just 1 chance to get in.
All right. Somebody asked if we have any specific cover stories that are not allowed.
Yes. So we can't impersonate anything like law enforcement or government related. So specifically, when we do fire inspector, we can't say we're a fire marshal. We have to say that we're with an insurance company doing like a check on the extinguishers. But if we were to say that we were a fire marshal, then it becomes like a law problem where we're not allowed to do that. There are some other examples. I'm sure you could get creative with some inappropriate ones, but that's the most common one that we do.
Okay. And do you have a favorite pretext that you've ever used?
In terms of what is the most successful and the most comfortable, usually the main internet service provider for an organization is the go-to, because it gives a good reason to be there. And a good excuse to get into non-public areas, like sensitive non-public areas. And you can use the fact that you're an internet service provider to use hollow threats and say like, you know, if I'm not here today, then your service may go down, or it may be interrupted in the future if you don't let me work on this right now, and so on and so forth. That's probably not my personal favorite, but it is the most comfortable, and it's probably the most successful overall.
All right. Someone asked if we actually plug in devices during an OSE.
I haven't personally done this, but I know that this has been done in the past, and it's definitely something that you can bring up if you're interested on the scoping call with the analyst. If it is being done, it's not usually to actually follow up on the social engineering. It's usually something that's just plugged in as evidence. So
Proof of concept.
yeah, exactly. It's not a USB that actually has ransomware. It's just an empty USB so that if you wanted evidence of the social engineering success, you could go and physically remove it from one of your devices.
All right, it looks like that's all we got for today. Thank you all so much again for joining us and dealing with our rescheduling, and we hope to see you next time.